Om. Namaste to all of you. Here we are gonna look at a very interesting topic: overcoming the overwhelming grief. Grief is an idea that we all are personally aware of. Even as a child, as a newborn infant, we have experienced grief of some sort: indigestion, need for diaper change, whatever may be the case. Grief is something that has an impact on every Jivatma, irrespective of whether it is a human or not. But the interesting thing about grief is the intensity, or at least the perceived intensity, and it varies from person to person. So before we go into the story aspect, we are going to focus on two incidents where Kausalya, the epitome of sattva, lets her guard down, is overpowered by grief, and then what follows it is only remorse. So before we go into that, let's understand what is grief, how do we understand it, from what perspective we understand it, so on and so forth. So we all understand that we have three instruments. The external instrument, or the Bahishkarana, what we call the body, which comprises of the five sensory organs, five jnanendriyas as we call, five karmendriyas, and the like. And then we have the two antakarana, or what we call as the internal instruments, in the form of manas and buddhi. So whenever there is a discomfort at the bodily level, it is very easy to understand. Like there is a cold Arctic wave gripping most parts of US right now. So if you were not properly clothed and were to go out maybe in shorts, you will quickly realize what misery is. But this kind of misery is not that big or that much damning our mind. What really happens is the mind modifications, what we understand as desire, that has a deep impact on the mind. And that's what we are going to understand. So let us take a minute to understand what this thing is all about. So, by the pressure of the vasanas, our mind projects itself in a certain path in the form of raga and dvesha, like or dislike. And being projected or propelled in a certain direction, it gets manifest as desire. Now, there is also another interesting element of the five sense organs that report to the mind. These sense organs bring the world of sensory objects to the mind's attention, thus casting a pressure in a certain direction, and it wants to feel the desire. Now, what is happening is, if the desire gets fulfilled or not, the desire gets fulfilled, what we understand is called pleasure. If the desire is not fulfilled, we experience sorrow. The degree of attachment to this desire will determine the intensity of pleasure or sorrow. The desire also, when blocked or suddenly somebody yanks it out, can morph itself into anger, jealousy, greed, delusion, so on and so forth. That's not the focus of our talk here. Like how the desire is modifying is not the focus. So when the vasanas get their impressions impinged on the mind, or when the sense organs reporting make an impact on this mind, the mind, which is of the nature of three gunas, sattva, rajas and tamas, is going to determine the direction. It's going to determine how things get projected. So it is important for us to understand that the same event may have different impact on different people. So let us not forget that. For the same person, the same incident may have different impact. For example, let's take a small child is there playing with some toy or a doll. The toy or doll gets broken or misplaced. There is a tremendous amount of grief in the child's mind. Now, when the child grows into a youth, has a boyfriend or girlfriend, and they are lost in their own world of sensory imagination or pleasures, at that time, if somebody were to take that toy or remind that child of that toy, it has no significance. The same event, but there is no grief. Why? The mind's composition and the value attachment is different. So we need to keep that in mind firmly as we grasp this topic today. So there is another interesting aspect. Adi Shankara, now if you are interested in looking at a copy of this talk for reading purposes, for those who are more inclined to reading, it is pinned on the top. It is an old article from my blog, but we are not going to be reading from that blog, though a lot of ideas will be essentially from it. So we have 6 waves affecting our samsara sagara. 6 types of waves. So the first one, these 6 are referred in Viveka Chudamani, where Adi Shankara refers to them as Shadbi Urumi. That is 6 waves. The first wave we are all familiar is Pipasa, which is thirst. The second wave we are equally familiar is Kshuda, which is hunger. Now this affects all jivas, whether we like it or not. The third one is Shoka, which is suffering, grief, misery, that sort of thing. Then we have Moha, which is kind of like delusion. The other two are old age, jara, and death, mrityu. So today we are just going to focus only on one wave, that is shoka. Now, interestingly, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a word which is used a couple of times. It's called yoga kshemam. You will find this as familiar because Indira Gandhi took this word and she coined the LIC's policy, yoga kshemam vahamyaham. What does yoga and kshema mean? Yoga means getting things which you don't have. And kshemam means retaining things which you already have. So in a very worldly sense, if you take this word yoga kshemam, the word grief represents exactly opposite to this. What is grief? Grief is nothing but Atmaji, there is some echo from your mic, although you are showing as muted. Okay, so what is grief? Grief is either we are not wanting to lose what we already have, or not obtaining what we are pining for. Very easy to look around and say, like, most men and women nowadays are concerned with what? Hair. Something that grows and falls, right? Naturally. So the ones who are having straight hair are worried about making it curly. The ones who are having curly hair are spending a lot of money to straighten it. And in case of bald men, it is even more interesting. They are desperate to keep their count from going down. Thus, grief is nothing but exact opposite of yoga kshemam. Now let us look at the story today, because our focus has always been to look at Itihasa Puranas and see how they are impacting our lives and how we can profit from it practically before we start developing the brains to start applying in other realms like spirituality or personal development and things like that. Now it is needless to say that Kausalya, the mother of Rama, must have been a very satvic person. Otherwise, how could she have given birth to Rama, right? Very simple. She must have been a very evolved person, needless to say. But there are a couple of instances where she completely loses her buddhi, and what she does causes a lot of regret later on. I don't know if we had this talk in English or not, but in one of the earlier talks in Tamil, I had gone at length on how Rama teaches us a lot of lessons how to handle extreme reversals. We all know that Rama was supposed to be coronated as the next crown prince. He was born with all the qualifications. He was the eldest. He had all the good qualities. And all he had to do was just accept charge. Dasaratha was wanting to make that in haste, and he announced the next day he is going to be crowned as the prince. While this was going on, Manthara, the maid of Kaikeyi, feels that this is not right in Kaikeyi's favor, so she gives a lot of bad advice. See, this is the exact opposite of satsanga, right? Dussanga. And that's exactly what happens. When we listen to the wrong people, when we listen to bad people, this is exactly what happened. So she reminds Kaikeyi to ask Dasaratha for the 2 boons which were already given to her. This is another information for us that we must not let outside people into our lives and control. Now you can say that there is no outside person controlling my mind. That's not true in this day and age. We voluntarily give that role. We don't have one mantra. We have so many mantras. Every WhatsApp group we are in, every Facebook group we are in, every TV soap we are seeing, every movie you are watching is a million times worse than mantra. So we are looking at mantra as one person in Ramayana, but in our life we have so many mantras. Now what happens? She brings to her table all the negative information to Kaikeyi. Kaikeyi in turn transfers it to Dasaratha. Now there is a reason why I am bringing this incident, so that we can compare and contrast Kaikeyi with Kausalya at that standpoint in time. Remember, I already highlighted, depending on the mind's nature, the same event can be perceived differently at different times. Right? Now, consumed by tamas, very, very selfish tamas, not even knowing that it is working against her own good, Kaikeyi was blinded to her desire. So, when she asked Dasaratha the 2 boons, that Rama should go to the forest and live like a hermit and for 14 years, and then the second one, Bharata should rule. And in 14 years you can take control of the government, people will forget everything, So there is no way that Rama can take back the rule. That was her plan. But here, interestingly, when Dasaratha hears that, he just collapses again and again and again. He falls at Kaikeyi's feet, though he is the husband and she is the wife. She is much younger to him. It didn't matter. To him, Rama was everything. And his number 2 love in his life was Kaikeyi. His number 2 was asking for number 1. So what Dasaratha did was repeatedly make plea to Kaikeyi, which was construed as a moment of weakness, and she took advantage of breaking the mental backbone, the dharmic backbone, the emotional strength of Dasaratha completely. So whenever you appeal to tamas from a position of weakness, tamas will never listen to it. Tamas you can see all around the world, like how terrorists or whenever poor people who are caught in the crossfire, they say, please don't do all these things. What do? They feel more empowered and they are more emboldened and they want to go against it. As simple as that. Now what happened? Rama said, okay, I am going to, when Rama was brought the next day morning, Rama didn't bother about whether it was 2 boons or not. He said, you are wasting your 2 boons. You could have just told me, I would have just gone. Your word is as good as my father's. I treat you both with the same level of respect. So he goes to Kausalya, his mother, takes permission. Despite her grief, and then he tries to stop Sita and Lakshmana, both of them kind of like win him over by their arguments. And having Sumantra, the minister, the lone person who has the guts and the backbone to talk against Kaikeyi. The lone voice that Valmiki records is that of Sumantra. Now Sumantra takes Rama, Sita, Lakshmana into the forest and he lets them go. But after he lets them go, he stays there 3 nights, 3 days, 3 nights. Hoping against hope, like when some of us we see, like say when there is a love failure or maybe even a person dies, what do? We hope against hope and say maybe that person will have a change of heart and come back. Nah, nothing like that is going to happen. This is called hoping against hope. So after Sumantra got tired of hoping against hope, he came on the day 5 to report back the events that had transpired between them and Rama, Sita and Lakshmana. So when he comes, he tells Dasaratha wants to know a complete field report. Hey, what has happened at that place? I want to know what exactly happened there. So the first information he says is, because everybody is tied to Rama, right? So the first information what Sumantra says is Rama gave the message that don't have any grievance against Kaikeyi. Let her words not be made to go in vain. And then he looked at Kausalya, who was the one who was more curious to know the message of Rama. So Rama had sent a personal message to her also. He said, Rama wanted to send the message that she should focus on taking care of Dasaratha, not get too much roiled by Kaikeyi's antics and shenanigans. And Bharata, he had a message for Bharata that Bharata should treat his mother like a mother. He had a message for Kausalya again, that Kausalya should treat Bharata not only as son but also as the king, so that she can do her duties and not take them lightly. But interestingly, all this was predictable and predicted. In a sense, people know that this is what Rama would say. But then there is an interesting fact that is brought about by Lakshmana. Lakshmana says, what sin did Rama do or what crime did he do that he was sent So he was fuming, still fretting and fuming. Though he was with Rama, he tried to control his anger. Nothing doing. So we need to learn that lesson from Lakshmana, that whenever Dharma is violated, we can't keep our emotions quiet. Of course, we should hand it over to Rama for guidance, but we can't be like just dummies like what we are when we see there is a lot of adharmic activities all around us. We just say, okay, we will just take it easy. What Lakshmana said was, he told, I have no father, mother and all this business and all gone. From today, my brother, my father and everything for me is only Rama. Look at how he channelized his anger into a dharmic path and elevated his goal and his direction. Instead of being a vehicle of anger, he became a vehicle of Dharma by saying that I will be wedded to Rama's cause. And that is a powerful message for all of us. Now, what has that got to do with grief today? Right? Now we are getting there. For we have to understand the backdrop of this grief. Now, Dasaratha is not worried about all these things. He is like, okay, all these things okay. Tell me, what is Rama getting to eat? What is that Sita, the one who has never seen the outside the palace, the great princess of Videha, and the greatest gem and jewel and the pride of Ayodhya? What is she doing? How is she coping up? Although there were some comments made by Sita, the smart minister Sumantra holds his tongue and keeps quiet, because he knows by just letting that odd word out, the situation is already boiling. It's ready to explode. So we must know that practical understanding of the situation and then go from there. He went on to say that Sita had adapted to the forest environs as if she has gone to the next door neighbor to go and have a chat, like a friendly chat. She is just that comfortable. As regards Rama and Lakshmana, they are used to all these things. They have already been to forests and they have already stayed with Vishwamitra, so they don't have any issues, right? But here is where we need to see what is happening. Kausalya loses her cool. She turns around and she kind of like says, what you have done, Dasaratha, this lady who is more delicate in the prime of her youth, we sent Sita and you are cool with that, you are fine with that, right? The one who is used to waking up with the auspicious sounds of music and Veda Gosha every day morning, now she has to wake up to lions roaring and tigers and snakes and all poisonous creatures. Rama, when can I go and see this Rama's face again? You mean to say in another 15 years? And when you have sent him, you have also sent this boy in the prime of his youth. Assuming that Rama comes back, do you think Bharata will give the kingdom? If Bharata is, assuming that Bharata is giving the kingdom, don't you think that it amounts to like begging and pleading from another person? So Rama is like a tiger. Which tiger will eat another animal's kill? It has so much pride that it will not touch it. So what you have done is you have destroyed the entire family. And then she turns around and she says, a woman has only 3 places to go. The first place is obviously her husband. And in this case, she said, like, you are as good as half dead. You don't even know what you are doing. You are sending your own son away. You are not even in the control. You are already a puppet of Kaikeyi. As regard the second hope for a lady is her son. Now what you have done, you have taken my only son and you have sent to the forest. There is a third option for a lady to go and live with her near relatives, and there is no fourth one. And in this case, there is no relative. Why? Everybody is equally sad, everybody is equally upset, everybody is desperate. Rama is not there. And look what you have done. You have not only ruined me, you have ruined not only your citizens, now you have ruined the neighboring states also. Because all the states are looking at Ayodhya for direction, for upholding Dharma. And what you have done? You have destroyed Dharma and you have by sending away Rama, and you have your ministers, everybody is ruined. My son is ruined. I am ruined. Only 2 people are happy. Your special wife Kaikeyi and your super son Bharata. Because she didn't know that it was not Bharata's fault, but that was what was understood at that time. Now, listening to these kind of talk, Dasaratha again and again fell unconscious. Now, you have to understand Dasaratha is very old and he is already reeling under the pressure. Now, she is telling all sorts of diplomatic things. Look, you have destroyed the citizens, you have destroyed the neighboring kingdoms, you have destroyed the entire civilization. All big ideas Kausalya is saying. In Dasaratha's mind, nothing is going. He is saying, my Rama is not there. All the other things I don't care. His grief was so big that Rama's separation, he could not understand or comprehend anything. But one thing he could do, he could not grasp he could understand that Kaikeyi was so bad. What he couldn't understand was what made Kausalya also become so bad. So with folded hands, with tears in his eyes, he was about to fall at her feet and he said, please, Kausalya, spare me those words. Don't you understand that you have always been rooted in Dharma? You have always treated me like you worship the husband as a devata, right? That's the Sanatana Dharma's traditional focus. Why we do that? That's a different conversation. But the guy is also upholding Dharma. That is the only reason. As simple as that. So he asked, how come Kausalya, you who has always been the abode of virtue, who has never ever spoken any unpleasant word to me, is suddenly now talking about all these things? Now the situation and plight of Dasaratha made Kausalya realize her act. what she committed in extreme grief, that she made a mistake of hurting her own husband who was also affected by the same situation. Sometimes in life, we think only our problem is big problem. Other people problem, we say, that's okay. That's okay. My problem is only big. Right? So whenever we think that selfish nature of I, me, myself, my problem is big, I don't care about other people's problem, such a problem happens. And then we come to the next stage, the next story. So this is our first story. Now we are going to analyze what happened towards the end, right? So the first story, we saw that Kausalya was lashing her barbed tongue at Dasaratha without understanding that he was in the same boat. He was not the real culprit. He was also suffering from the same problem what she was going through. So this is a problem which most of the people who are having some sort of fear, some sort of grief, some sort of misery in their life, they cannot grasp that. Now the second situation, Dasaratha is dead. Bharata is being asked to come back to Ayodhya without any information. He comes straight to meet his mother, Kaikeyi, and Kaikeyi informs him when he asks what are these bad omens and why is so much desolate melancholy in the landscape, why everybody is turning their face away from me. He couldn't understand anything. So what happened? Kaikeyi tells that this is the grand success I have done for you. I have gotten from Dasaratha this wonderful kingdom for you. For that I have also eliminated Rama and sent him to the forest. The minute Bharata hears, he just falls unconscious. I think falling unconscious is a genetic thing in the Ikshvakukula, I think. Same thing happens to Yudhishthira also, and a lot of Mahatmas, like their mind is so delicate that if they come across some very negative, strong negative situation, they can't handle it. They just collapse. Well, we are exactly opposite. They have to learn lessons from us. We are so strong, like we create all the negative and we are not even bothered, right? That is the trend what we have nowadays. Now, Bharata, when he woke up from his swoon, he declares again and again that he has no idea about this consecration. He had no idea about why his mother did it. He had no idea that what her plans were or schemes were. He declared again and again that he had nothing to do with it. Kausalya was able to vaguely make out Bharata's voice, but she was not able to understand that Bharata was innocent. So what happened? She was in a very confused state of mind and she asked Sumitra to lead her to Bharata's palace. But Bharata and Shatrugna had in meanwhile gone to Kausalya's palace and looked at, she is not there, so they are coming back. On the way they see Kausalya had fallen. Sumitra is trying to raise her. And Bharata saw her and he goes to her and he embraced her and washed her feet with tears. But remember, Kausalya is displaying rare tendency like us. I mean, like, her tendency to be like us is rare. Let's put it that way. She has an outburst telling that what Bharata was going to gain by sending Rama to the forest. Now he can share along with his mother all the papa which his mother had spearheaded. So she told him that, wow, now you got all this wonderful kingdom, you can be a cool king. Sarcastically, it's like, like Bharata was feeling like 1,000 needles were being poked in his sore wound already. Then with folded hands, with streams of tears, with a heart that is bent out of shape, with deep sorrow, he made a list of 30-40 imprecations on himself, like cursed himself. He said, if I was ever instrumental, let me never see the knowledge of Vedas. Let me be like all the papa that will go to a king who ignores his subjects. Let me get the papa of that slave master that makes his servants toil but doesn't give them any pay. Like that, he gives a huge list of what was considered as adharma in those days. And Kausalya was shell-shocked. She said, like, stop buddy, stop. I can't let you continue this self-cursing on and on and on. This fellow is like, Bharata is like a madman cursing himself. His heart is also in grief, but his grief was compounded by Kausalya, who did not see that even he was having the sorrow. She thought only she owned all the sorrow. So what happened? She could not see past her grief, which is exactly why Bharata had to shock her. Just like Dasaratha appealed to her satvic nature, he said, you are such a wonderful lady. But when the same trick he tried to Kaikeyi, what happened? Her tamas reacted looking Dasaratha as a weak person. Whereas when a satvic person is put in the same situation like Kausalya, she realized her mistake and she said sorry to Dasaratha. Same way, when Bharata was telling all that, she could realize that Bharata was innocent. She blessed that Bharata will achieve the same state as Lakshmana, who is doing Rama Kaikarya, Rama Seva. And looking that Bharata had not wavered from Dharma was a big ointment on her wounded heart. See, Dharma and Dharmic connection can play such a powerful role only to a sattvic mind, mind you. So she took Bharata in her lap and both of them in the middle of the road hugged each other and wept so profusely. So now what we are going to do is we are going to pause the two incidents and we are going to digest what we can learn from this narration. We already saw what happens when grief overpowers the mind. So we already know that there are three instruments we all have: the body, the mind, and the intellect. Now, what happens in case of a plant? It has an evolved body and a semblance of mind, like where is sunlight, where is water, that sort of thing. The animal has a well defined body and mind. Some of them have a semblance of buddhi. Some of them are really much higher than what we can understand. For instance, elephants can know that there is death in the family and they carry sorrow in their memory. So, same way you will see a lot of other animals display a semblance of buddhi. But when a man is blinded by grief or anger, the buddhi takes a back seat. So, at what level are we? Level of animal only. So, we want to gain our humanness or our human mindset by pulling up our buddhi. But unfortunately, this buddhi is under the grip, vice-like grip of sorrow, grief. Let's see what this grief has. Let's understand through the words of Kausalya herself what happens to grief and our mind. See, whenever we have any sorrow in our mind, what happens? It keeps replaying the same record again and again and again. It keeps adding more and more gravity to that dark thought. And it keeps pulling us down and down and down. We feel more heavier in our heart, right? It can be death of a near and dear. It can be betrayal of someone. It can be something which we have been counting on for all our life and then suddenly it is yanked out. Whatever may be the reason for our sorrow, this sorrow has a tendency of heaviness that keeps pulling us down. Now what happens is, apart from it pulling us down, it also blinds our buddhi and forces us to do some things which we are not happy about later on. We miss some opportunities or we make some missteps. We take that grief and redirect it as outrage on somebody else. We do all this kind of circus. So what happens? We end up with guilt, shame, remorse, and even more bigger negative feelings. Now all these negative feelings clump together and they are all taking us down one by one, down and down and down. Let's listen to the words of Kausalya. She says, Shoko nashyate dhairyam. What is the one thing that I have that I can use to dig my way out of this well of grief? If you have fallen into quicksand, why can't you get up? Because there is no support. Every time you try to come up, you get pulled even deeper. Every struggle is going to make you sink into that quicksand. Same way, this grief keeps pulling you down because it cuts the strength of your courage right away. When you don't have courage, you don't have anything to hope for. Your future looks so gloomy and doomed that you don't know why you are going through what you are going through. and you feel the pressure even more, and you feel more miserable, and you make more mistakes, and you go down. The same process gets repeated again and again. Shoko nashyate shrutam, Kausalya says. That means, when we say the word shrutam here, it means knowledge. But basically, it also means Vedas, it also means knowledge about our self, our real identity, that everything is lost. All knowledge is lost when we are grieving. Is that not true? When we are in extreme grief, we don't know. All this Vedanta, what we know, listen and things like that, they don't come to the aid because our mind is already in the grip of sorrow. You say like, no, you don't understand my situation. I am already miserable. You are trying to help me, only makes me feel worse. So even if somebody wants to help us, we can't accept that because our entire foundation is taken away. Shoko nashyate sarvam. The shoka will destroy everything, she says. Na asti shoka sama ripu. There is no enemy that is equal to that of grief. There is absolutely no strength left in us when we are in the grip of such sorrow. Shakyam apatitaha shodum praharaha ripu hastaha astata. So what she says is, if an enemy gives you like a death-like punch, you can even withstand it. Maybe you can even fight him back. Shodum apatitaha shokam shokaha susukshamaha apina shakyate. But when grief catches you and gives you a very gentle light blow, I can't even handle it. I can't do anything with it. I am not able to tolerate it. So what happens is, even people who have known, who are dharmajna, that means people who know all the shastras and dharmas, they have studied, they are practicing it. For the entire life they have spent studying all this. But if their mind gets occupied with grief, even such people don't have any ability to do anything. Look at the powerful message and wisdom of Kausalya. When Dasaratha appealed to her, she is saying sorry. For that she is doing introspection, and that introspection brings such deep wisdom. Now tell me, if you are just watching Ramayana like a story, like some soap serial, will you get anything? But in Valmiki Ramayana, you are able to get the essence of it. Even if you go with a poor, cheap translation, even if you can't follow Samskrita, that's fine. But you are able to get the wisdom of it. And that is why we need to connect with Itihasa Puranas, with Bhagavad Gita. Apply that in our life practically. Now, we also have a situation where somebody whom we love, or someone who is very near and dear, or someone very trusted person, they backstab us. Like I was telling in the morning, I know about this family, very sweet couple, very beautiful couple. with two children, beautiful children. I mean, like they're my mind's eye is still able to see those children. This lady one day developed some sort of, God knows what happened. She left her family and she ran away with some day laborer. Imagine, she is having a husband who is having a stable government job, who is providing for all her needs. She has two beautiful children. Yet this person, she kind of like falls for some day labor, and she is ready to destroy the lives of her own family with which she is attached. Now, in that moment of this backstabbing, if you take for example and try to look at it, now I don't know what that family is doing and things like that. I am sure that the time has healed, and that is the point here. When we go through this sorrow, what happens, even though we try to replay it again and again and again and internalize it, thus we keep digging ourselves deeper into negative tamas. But in normal course of time, if we don't go into that depression, that kind of like negative thought process, normal process, time is a great healer. Time heals more sorrows than you and I can even imagine. Imagine the sorrow what you had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when you were a child. Do they even matter now? So I want to remind that grief gets dissolved by time. Just like our strengths also will get dissolved in time, so does the negative also get dissolved in time. So there is always hope even in the worst case scenario. You may not be able to bring back the person to life, but there is still hope. For folks who have not read Viktor Frankl, now if I'm not asking you to read the account of Viktor Frankl, it's very, very dark, and the Hitler kind of like how he was killing and butchering people in camps and things like that, in Auschwitz and things like that, and how he escaped, how he managed to come out of it, and how after many years that mental trauma was there. It's a very kind of like a very heavy and dark book, in the sense it's a dark in the sense like it tells about all the negative, but it's also, so one of the things that he is able to hold on and put his pieces of his life a little bit, unlike many people who just could not handle it, they run into the electric wire and commit suicide. Every week there will be somebody breaking down, every other day there will be somebody breaking down, and they'll run into that electric wire and they will just die. So, how do you handle grief? Always understand that time is a healer. Today you may not be able to find a solution, but tomorrow you will. So don't forget that. You will find a solution. Now, how do you have that? Is that a false sense of bravado? Is that a sense of like a misplaced hope? No, it is not a sense of misplaced hope. The real reason why you will be able to overcome grief is if you understand your real nature. What is your real nature? You are not this body. You are not this mind. You are not this intellect. You are not the honor, dishonor, all these ideas which you have in your head. You are Jivatma. Now there is a bigger truth than this Jivatma, that is Paramatma. Now different Acharyas have given different interpretations of the equation between Jivatma and Paramatma, but let's put that aside, that is step 2. But the mere fact that you realize that you are a Jivatma is enough to help you overcome any sort of negative sorrow, misery that is going in your life. Whether it is lack of money, whether it is somebody who backstabbed you, or whether you are facing unsurmountable problems as it looks like. Then there is another element of this grief. This grief, if you see this snowy mountains or some other mountains like Himalayas where the landslides are very common, avalanche, that sort of thing. What is the common thing between avalanche and grief is both start small. But as they gather momentum, they grow and take a life of their own. So what happens? We think that we are under the grip of sorrow, but that sorrow we amplify in our head and we keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger, just like a small speck of dirt that enters the eye. How much irritation is there? But if you really see, when it comes out and see like, man, this is so small. Right? So the thing is that there is another element of this grief. We all know this. Misery loves company, right? Why? It tries to clump together. First event, now when you are very upset and very angry and sorrow and things like that, you are thinking all the bad things that happened in your life or in other people's life. You are now connecting all of them. Now suddenly you make a super highway, you make a big pathway. And you say like, all these are connected to me. Oh my God, poor me, boo hoo hoo. And what happens is it kind of takes away the opportunities that we could have to address these situations. But since our mind is buried in sorrow, we create these self-fulfilling negative prophecies and we make more and more forced and unforced errors. There is another aspect of this misery. We earlier saw this in the forgiveness episode, where when we don't forgive, when we are having this anger, what I do is I transfer this anger across people, across generations, across dimensions. Same way, grief also does something like that. We earlier saw that how desire itself is manifesting in different forms as pleasure, sorrow, greed, jealousy, all sorts of things, anger, right? When Kausalya thought that Bharata and Dasaratha were immune to the grief, she could not understand that they were the reasons in her mind. So she lashed her tongue. When both of them held their hands up and cried foul and said like, please don't hurt us, we are on the same side. Because her mind was satvic, she was able to understand. If our mind is not satvic, we will not understand too. And also what she did was, Lakshmana was fretting and fuming, seeing all the events that transpired between Dasaratha and Kaikeyi. He is coming like a volcano that is ready to erupt. When he saw the grief of Kausalya, he could not keep his calm anymore. He was ready to explode. He said, let's take over this kingdom. Let's put that old man in the prison, and anyone who dare question, I'll kill them. So what Kaikeyi did was, she didn't know that her anger, her sorrow was transferred to somebody else as anger, which is something which happens to all of us. We don't understand. especially husband, wife, two people may be having arguments and whatnot. One of them is deeply upset, but their sorrow gets transferred to the other person as anger or frustration or something like that. And then the cycle of negativity continues. Because we are not appealing to the satvic nature of the other person, this cycle of negativity continues. So, how do you counter this grief? We already saw one way to counter grief is kala, time. But there was the technique of Dasaratha and Bharata, which we can learn, that they appealed to the satvic nature of with Kausalya. Of course, it didn't work with Kaikeyi because she's lost all her reasoning. She is like 100% tamasic at that time. So the technique did not work. Whereas, when Dasaratha appealed to Kausalya and Bharata appealed to Kausalya, her satvic nature helped her to overcome her personal grief and look at the other person's grief and appreciate it. The same thing we are able to see. Sumantra, whenever he saw Dasaratha and Kausalya were like totally lost cause, he kept focused on reassuring them. Both of them said like, hey, take me right now to Rama. I want to go to Rama. Both Dasaratha and Kausalya. He said, don't worry. Rama has adapted to the forest already. You don't know how quick he is. Lakshmana, he has very little needs. All he wants is Rama. That's all. And Sita, beautifully she has also adapted. So whenever we have someone who is having a lot of grief, that kind of putting the hand on their shoulder, giving them hope. Remember, what does grief do? It completely destroys their courage. Shoko nashyate dhairyam. That's what we understood from Kausalya, right? So what we have to do is, we have to send those messages that are comforting. Build those little bridges. So the act of commiserating, having sympathy, empathy, those are like building bridges. Now imagine you are in an island. That entire island has now turned into quicksand. It is all like burying within. So what is the only way a person from outside can help you? If I have multiple bridges from outside to connect to that island, I will be in a position to maybe throw a rope or something and then pull you out, right? So when we develop the qualities of sympathy and empathy, choosing the right words, understanding the situation, comforting the other person, especially when somebody is in grief, know what to talk and what not to talk. Because we could tell one word, the normal person's mind would understand properly, but the person in grief, remember, their buddhi is totally destroyed, their buddhi is in the back burner. So they can misinterpret even the most benign word which you are telling. So you have to be double careful when you are talking to them. Now if we are already in the grip of sorrow, how do we overcome? We already saw that by remembering our real identity, our nature. Our real nature is what? That of Atman, and our connection with Paramatman. That will help us to come out. That is one place where you will never, any problem, the worst of the kind in the universe, all the problems in the world, no problem. If you hold on to that, your real identity, you can come out of it. Even if nobody else is helping you, You hold on to your real identity. So for that, holding on to the real identity, what you need and I need is to develop a sense of satvic nature. See, we see the case where someone like Dasaratha is having a complete loss of life owing to only grief. Why? Because he not only forgot about himself, forget about him not understanding that he is a Jivatma and all those things, but he had Rama who was Paramatma who was sitting right next to him, but he could not see Rama as Paramatma. He saw Rama as a body. That is why he went to only Swarga. He didn't go to Vaikuntha. So what do we do? How do we develop this sattvic nature? How do we strengthen our roots? How do we strengthen the dharmic connection? By constantly having satsanga, by constantly doing some sort of sadhana, take some study of scriptures regularly, periodically, for maybe it is once a week, maybe it is daily few minutes, depending on your availability, time, comfort, vasanas, whatever, depending on whatever is your pre-orientation. It doesn't matter. Whether you have an acharya, whether you don't have an acharya, doesn't matter. That commitment to do little sadhana and continuous satsanga will uplift us from the worst and worst of grief that can befall on anyone. So that is like an insurance policy. So we know that grief is going to happen to everyone. It is a given. Whether you want it or not, we all are going to encounter grief. So there was one great person who said, pain we are going to undergo in life at different points in time. Maybe pain of the body, maybe pain of the mind, pain of the intellect. We will undergo that. But misery is optional. You may feel the pain, but you may not be still miserable. What is that insurance policy? We saw that how Kausalya's satvic nature, when it was appealed to, she was able to hold on to it and come out. What if you don't even give that much space to grief to hold in your heart? Then what will happen if all this satsanga, spiritual knowledge and all this Vedanta and all this information, how it will keep you aloof from that grief that comes your way? Just like the water on a lotus leaf, it will not even touch you. So how do we do that? Only one simple solution. Hold on to Bhagavan's feet. Hold on to his lotus feet. That is the only antidote to all sorts of grief in this samsara. And we will be able to come out of it every single time. Every single time grief comes our way, whether it is because of our own actions or others' actions or inactions, that is the only way we can 100% ensure that we can come out of any such misery. So, with that, let us think about Bhagavan's Kamala Charana, and may we pray that everyone be shielded and protected from any form of grief that comes your way. May we take this wonderful two-part story from Valmiki Ramayana, apply it in our life and use it as a shield that we will be immune to any form of sorrow, any form of grief, any form of misery. Jai Shri Ram.